This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks, show number 579 with guest Christian Johnson, recorded on July 27th, 2023. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home and other places as well. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a hot and sweltering. Christian, anytime there's water droplets on your windows, right, it's a little scary, right? A little indication of some bad weather yet to come.
Most definitely. Cause for concern, cause to get out your dehumidifier. Protect the mold.
In this case, on the outside. Sometimes in the winter, we get it on the inside, but when it's super cold outside. But we have had here in Bellevue, we've been running into 90s with 90% humidity. Interesting, the humidity goes up at night, and so the morning windows are just covered. And of course, and we're going to send all that hot weather your way. We're talking 80s.
Received loud and clear. It's made its way.
We're maybe looking at some 80s over the weekend. Of course, we'll post a show with some world-class show notes out at theaverageguy.tv. Big thanks to Marv B, who joined me last week. Good show. I actually got more comments than I would normally get on a show. Appreciate you guys' emails. You can always email me, Jim at theaverageguy.tv if you want to do that. But you really like that Signology segment with Marv. So if you haven't heard it yet, jump back there. It's just one show, 578. Jump back and get listened to. And Marv, thanks for coming on here. And of course, big thanks to our Patreon subscribers. If you find value in this podcast in any way, whatever that means, if you want to join our Patreon team, we just have one plan. It's $5 a month. If you want to join the team, helps do things for me here with this. We use it for the show. You can, of course, give back. Join us at theaverageguy.tv/Patreon. And since Christian is here, Christian Johnson from Maple Grove Partners and other things, one of the founders of this show, as we started it 1,000 years ago. If you want to check out Maple Grove Partners, of course, secure, reliable, high-speed hosting, and he's still doing that. And I think Christian's still $10 plans. Are you fighting inflation every chance you get?
We just want to give great things away for super reasonable prices. So if you prepay annually, you're still going to get $10 a month. And we have a fun time doing it. Had a nice growth in customer adoption in the last year or so. And so we've been making investments into our client-side platform, as well as some of our email capabilities. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but also working on trying to get to more of like a managed model for apps that I think people would use if they were just there and easy. Self-hosted instances of Bitwarden being a good example. Self-hosted net boxes, et cetera, et cetera. So fair amount of ideas. Thinking about how to implement some of those and working on the kind of the core bread and butter in the meanwhile, which has been working really well for folks. So,
well, of course, Maple Grove Partners has been the lifetime sponsor of Home Gadget Geeks. It's hosted it from day one and continues to do so. If you want to show your appreciation for that, and you have the need, we don't want you just needlessly opening up websites, but if you have a need, check it out, maplegrovepartners.com, all one word, maplegrovepartners.com. And Christian will take care of you and can do just about anything. So, Christian, since I have you here, appreciate your sponsorship for these 13 years. Kind of crazy, isn't it?
It is wild. It is really wild. From the days of running Average Guy on eBay specials to where it is today. A lot happens in 13 years. It's been pretty fun though.
15, 16. How old were you when we kicked this thing off?
Yeah, around there. I think I started doing guest appearances on Home Service Show when I was 14. So yeah, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ken wants to know when's there's going to be a West Coast server location for Maple Grove Partners. You going to expand out to the West Coast?
It's funny you say that. Part of our think big strategies have been how can we kind of do what I call micro Maple Groves in various locations to get latency east and west and get better content distribution. Honestly, whenever I go, it's funny though, whenever I go to Europe, I always test like, so how's the latency to back home? And like, it's surprisingly good. I've tested it from UK, I've tested it from Spain, mostly Western Europe, but like the fact that it's, it's a good 9-10 hour plane ride over the Atlantic, but the latency still looked pretty good. So east-west, more of like a disaster resiliency type scenario, etc. There's other ways of doing that without physically being east-west. Yeah, it's things we've thought about. So
maybe Ken is offering to open up some space.
Yeah, I was going to say we can negotiate any number of possibilities here. So
Ken is out on the West Coast, and certainly from the Midwest standpoint. I mean, this Omaha is a great location. We've got a lot of data centers here. Google has
a lot of colo space,
a gigantic data center just across the river in Iowa. And that thing, I can sometimes when they turn on the servers, you feel the whole city kind of bogged down a little bit. They got a lot going on out there. But I have really appreciated your hosting on this. It is lightning fast. In fact, the other day I was uploading the MP3 there, which usually takes about 3 seconds. Click it and it's done, right? Kind of deal. And it took a little while, and I was like, "What's going on?" So I was checking some things out. It was me. And rebooted I've been on T-Mobile, a wireless internet service now for maybe a year. It's been great. Every once in a while, I just got to reboot that router or that modem, and picked right back up and was seeing 500 down and 100 up. Good enough for what I'm doing.
Good enough for 5G.
Yeah. No, good enough, and working out pretty well. Any future from Maple Grove partner standpoint? Anything else you guys you want to talk about as future stuff that might be coming up?
Not necessarily future, but one of the things that I don't mention often that folks could think about for certain use cases is big uptick in interest in just email only hosting in the last couple of years. So, at Google, if you want a custom domain and a custom name, it's going to be $5 per month per mailbox. Well, for us, it's $5 per month for 10 mailboxes and, storage space, etc. You're not going to have Google Drive and some of these other built-in things that Google has done to entice folks to their workspaces platform. But I can't tell you how many small businesses I see where they send you a business card and it says @gmail.com, and like your thought about the maturity of the business instantly goes down a notch, because it's like, why? Like if you're that invested and interested in running the business seriously, like why don't you have your own name? Yeah. That's been something that's been kind of cool for folks. Our roadmap is a journey in progress, as I like to say. So that's where we're at for the moment.
You mentioned that, and of course, I manage a Gallup. I manage the 13 or 14,000 certified coaches we have around the world, and I see their email addresses. And when we send out our monthly newsletter, I physically get a bounce report that says, "Hey, these emails were not delivered." I go find them. Oftentimes find them on LinkedIn. Every month, 5 or 6 Gmail accounts, mailbox is full, right? And it's just like, first of all, how much spam do you have to get? Right? To fill up. I don't know what they give you on Gmail. Do you have?
I think it's 5 gigs per free mailbox.
Okay. Yeah. And I've had Gmail forever, and it's never filled up on me, but you kind of like, man, how much spam do you have to get for that? So it's, I don't, for me personally, I don't see Gmail as a less professional email address, but I get a sense it's a garbage email address. In other words, I just got it to send spam to or whatever, and I'm not really paying. To me, when I get the mailbox's full error message, I go, well, it was an email you didn't really care about, because you were just, you're just directing all your, and to be fair, some folks, they get it, they mean well, it just fills up. Right? Okay, no judgment there on that one. But that's kind of the way I've seen it. Let me ask you this question. Last week, Marv and I were talking about, he was talking about Synology, and we were talking about, I was kind of referring to, I've got this Moro data box that I back up. It keeps about 750 gig of data here in the Average Guy.TV studios, caches the rest of it back up to B2, Backblaze B2. fairly cheap. I just checked my bill. I have about 3 terabytes. I pay about $15 a month. So very cold storage. From a Maple Grove partner standpoint, do you guys want to be in that space of cold storage? Is that a pricing place you want to be? Or for you guys, is it more like hot, active websites, that kind of stuff?
The website stuff is definitely the bread and butter just because it's what brings content communities together. And I certainly have a lot of fun supporting that. The cold storage is definitely an interesting angle. And we actually have done some hardware procurement in this space. So we have the ability to do it for external customers. One of the things, though, that we're kind of looking at from a unique angle is really being able to give some properties and SLAs and confidences around the encryption model of the data, how the data is secured, et cetera. Because cold storage is fine. It's cool. But really being able to have some properties around encryption in transit and at rest of the data, and giving folks ability to that may have very sensitive workload requirements, but some kind of mid-state solution where they don't have to pay through the nose enterprise to get some of those security value adds is kind of an interesting space for us, because it does help address people who have cold term storage needs, but it also helps. You can think of it kind of as like a vault, right? So folks, could you put a vault in your house? Sure. But maybe you want to go open a safety deposit box at a bank, and you have a lot of layers of security around that vault. And so I like to think of the work we've done in the cold storage area and what we might offer at some point would really be more of that concept, where it's not just cold storage, but it's a kind of a safety deposit at a bank type model for data that's going to have high sensitivity requirements for customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think my data, with the exception of one file folder that's got some, sensitive backed up stuff that I don't want anybody else to get a hold of. The rest of it's just podcast, which if somebody got a hold of it and they wanted to listen to it, that would be awesome.
Fabulous. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like CDNs are fairly dime a dozen for that use case. It's not an area I feel that Maple Grove is going to particularly offer uniqueness in, right? Part of what I think makes Maple Grove unique now is web hosting is commodity. That's, very saturated market. But I think the culture of how we work with customers and what we deliver and how we customize it is fairly unique. It's a common market segment with a non-common approach to the market. And so I try to always think about, I don't want to do things in Maple Grove that are commonplace and just have it be also Randy. I also don't want Maple Grove to become something that is a reseller platform or something where it's folks don't have confidence that the data and the hosting and the capability is all in-house. It's all our platform. It's not being resold. Your data is not being resold, et cetera. So there's a lot of just brand reputation aspects there where that's really important to us, and any of the types of features that we offer and have contemplated offering moving forward would have those tenets in mind.
Yeah. No, right on. This week I thought a lot about, I've got this probably 3 terabytes of, we have 180 or 580 episodes here. I'm rounding it up a little bit. We have a bunch of Cyber Frontiers that are out there. I think we got to 80 or 90 or something along those lines. And then a bunch of other podcasts that I've done. So that generates 3 terabytes, which in today's world is not huge.
Not huge, yeah.
$15 for 3 terabytes cold storage that sits there. Not bad. Pretty with Backblaze, I think pretty bottom, like you said, commodity, right? Yeah. Backblaze makes it very easy to get that data there. It's a little more expensive if I wanted to get it back. And so, Christian, I asked Marv this question last week, and he said I was solving problems that didn't exist. But let me ask you this. I keep probably, let's just say 2 terabytes of it there, a terabyte local, because I've got this cache server, right? So it only keeps let's say it keeps 750 gig local. The rest of it caches it back up, keeps the most recent files here.
Mm-hmm.
Like from that worst case scenario, like I've often thought, should I bring those old files back? Their podcast stuff. It's not like they're pictures or videos or whatever. Just leave them on Backblaze and pay the maintenance fee. What? Any thoughts? Any advice for me from like? Is it okay just to leave them there, pay the $15 a month, and let them ride, or should I? Because I've definitely lost control of them. They're on B2. Yeah. That's where they exist in cold storage. I don't have a local copy. I don't. Any thoughts on that?
What's the name of the platform that's doing the cold storage?
Backblaze.
Okay.
Backblaze.
Have you ever looked at their like SLA agreement or durability agreements?
I could not recite it today. Fairly common, and they've been great service, and a lot of folks use them. So I wouldn't question the integrity of their stuff. But
yeah, I guess my thinking on this is that a lot of folks in the home gadget community or otherwise could go out online, buy the hard drives, set up a RAID 5 or a RAID 50 or, what have you, set up the storage environment in-house, put all the data on there, be like, look how much storage I got, plenty of space. I don't have to pay anyone a monthly subscription. And that's great, but it's actually not average guy because doing it yourself at home and meeting the same level of durability that usually these companies are promising in their SLAs for these types of services that you're paying $15 a month for, pretty hard to do by yourself. Less so about the initial build and much more so about the upkeep and maintenance, right? Like first you have to factor in, you've built this thing that's a one-time expense, but you're not thinking about the time it takes to run it, to patch it, to power it, to network it. And so you're probably spending, if you combine your human time and your power bill, that's probably $5 a month right there just to have this thing kind of living in your home 24/7. Some might say, well, I don't have it on 24/7. I do, wake on LAN or I turn it off when I'm not using it or whatever. But like, if I'm comparing that to this cold storage, like it's always there if I need to go get it. So just from a economics perspective, even if you're DIYing it, you're already about 33% of the way into that $15 a month. I think where that other 66% comes from is really the fact that there's going to be just huge differences in that durability over time. So maybe you don't have good alarming set up on your disks and you lose a disk and you let that happen. And then you lose a second disk. And like now you're shelling out big money because you're trying to recover a RAID volume. So I personally think that the model of cold storage in the cloud, whatever that cloud is, and local content storage for your recent needs is kind of cool for a couple of reasons. One, that local storage model of like what you're using, let's just say within the last 12 months, chances are 95% of your retrieval requirements will be data that's within the last 12 months. So you're almost acting as your own mini CDN in that context because you're keeping data that is relevant in residency to where you need it. So that's a data residency requirement. From a durability requirement, as your data grows and you don't know what to do with it, but you want to, and that you have to store it. But you're probably going to look at it maybe once or twice again. There's really nothing in my mind wrong with putting that cold storage in the cloud, and you're probably going to see it, forget it, etc. There's two caveats I would say to that. One is, if I didn't have high confidence in the provider and their security, integrity, trust model, every single bit I would write to that cloud, I would client-side encrypt myself just because I'm a tinfoil hat. So sorry. A lot of people, like I said, if it's your podcast, no one's going to care. Like, leave that data the way it is. But if you're really going to think of it as like equivalencies of what it would look like if you were running it in-house, that might be a consideration. The other thing to think about is query and retrieval, right? Because we all admit that we're not going to retrieve it very often, and that's good. But one of the things I don't like about a fair number of cold storage systems, the way people use them, is that let's say you're just blanketly saying anything older than 12 months, I'm going to put into this vault and that's it. How do you know and query like, oh yeah, this is what I put in there 4 or 5 years ago, and now you have to go search for it. And I think one of the hardest challenges that continues to go unaddressed is not the fact that you can store it and retrieve it and back it up. It's how do you query the dang thing? And I still find, it's amazing. Like, we're on Windows 11. I still haven't upgraded, by the way. Are you surprised? Okay. You shouldn't be surprised.
You're not missing it. You're not missing anything.
Yeah. I have one burner laptop I keep that is Windows 11, and everything else is Windows 10 that I care about. But it's amazing to me how poor, like, basic Windows searches. And I don't mean like you type in a query and it doesn't find the document. I'm not really talking about that, but like, I've found it amazingly frustrating as a Windows user how like Mac has figured some of this out. Their data tagging is pretty good. If I just dump images at a Mac OS all day long, next thing I know, it's categorized family member A, B, C, friend Y. I can search and razor and slice and dice those images any number of ways. But then even Apple, which has a great interface, I think does file search and multimedia much better than Windows in that regard, then you kind of run into the same problem at the end of the day. Well, if you're using cold storage behind that, how are you enabling those things to work? Well, Apple's answer is, well, you use iCloud and then you pay us that $15 a month or whatever it is. Yeah. So like there are models here that work for the ecosystem that you're in. And for me, I would say that is outside of the usual security durability stuff that you'll hear me frequently talk about. I would say ability to retrieve and use the data is something that I think is oftentimes an afterthought. A lot of people focus on what's the price I can store, 1 terabyte of data, 3 terabytes of data, 10 terabytes of data. And it's like, yeah, it's great. But like, what can you do with that? Like, will you be able to pull it back down in a way you understand? And will you be really frustrated when your internet connection is constantly syncing this stuff in and out of cold storage because you can't find what you're looking for? So that's where I demur into philosophy on that model. But
yeah, it's a super good point. And I mean, it even holds true to my podcast files. I could go on the Mora data box and I can find, I've structured them by year or every 100 podcasts gets wrapped into a folder. Mm-hmm. And I can go to the averageguy.tv. We have a pretty good search out there. I've been using some plugins. There's a good way to find it. So in theory, I could use the averageguy.tv platform, search for it, find what I want. Some years I did transcripts, some I didn't. I can get pretty close. And then go back into the folder structure on the Mora data box, drill down to it, not on a Mac, because the Mac tries to pull all that stuff back. The Windows just goes, now we see the structure, then it gives you a little X on the file to say it's not really there, right?
Yeah.
And I could grab that, pull it down, and that would give me, for me, that's the reason kind of the way I do it this way, I could pull that down. Now, the number of times I've actually pulled a podcast from cold storage is less than one. I've actually never, like, the only time I ever did that is when I mistakenly put some, like, I had a process go rogue and it started like trying to pull everything down. And over the course of 2 days, I had 8 terabytes of this. I was back on Cox where I was metered. And they were like, hey, I got this alert. Hey, you're about to go over your 1 terabyte. And I was like, that's not possible. By the time I got to it, I'd done 3 terabytes, right? And they're like, you might as well go unlimited for the month because you're just going to blow through this, which is not a bad solution, right? If you make a mistake, it's $50. So, so far the track record on pulling that back. Now, again, for some folks, for most people, we're talking pictures or videos, home videos. I don't have any of those. We keep those all on the various platforms that they live on. And I've really never thought about pulling them all together in one place, but it got me thinking a little bit, for new folks listening to the show. Maybe you've come to Home Gadget Geeks in the last couple of years. The reason we talk about these is because we all came from the Home Server Show where we talked about this on a fairly regular basis of having, this data local. And a lot of the listeners to this podcast still have Synology or QNAP or Unraid. They're doing their own, right? We talk about it. So there's still a lot of individuals who listen to the show are very interested in that subject of, got all this data, what do I do with it, right? From that standpoint. So Christian, I appreciate you walking me through that. Anything else you'd add?
Well, yeah, just one of the things you mentioned that made me think was that, some of my podcast I transcribed and some of them I didn't. And this kind of goes back to maybe my comment on how our operating systems have not meaningfully gotten better out of the box for home users in many ways, because like, what's a basic feature that I would want of a real search system is like, all the MP3s on my hard disk should be able to be transcribed on the spot, local processed by the search index. And yeah, if you want to opt in, the MP3s go up and get the big vacuum sucking sounds and turn a transcription back because you don't have the local compute, fine. But like when you're looking at the CPUs and GPUs that people are building, like you have the ability to do local transcription. It's going to be all right. Yeah. But how cool, intuitive, like how hard is it that we can't just offer out of the box, like advanced search to like, I shouldn't have to like, what podcast was that? And did I tag it right? And like, no, I should be able to search a keyword and all my multimedia should be transcribed. And the system should be figuring out just with basic statistics, here are the most frequent word counts in each of these audio bits and generating the labels on its own. I mean, this is stuff that like, the technology is getting somewhat dated for some of this stuff. Like transcription is not new, been around for a while, getting a lot faster and cheaper to do. And it's like, because we have taken so many of these market segments and made them things that have to be this, you pay a software as a service type cloud model, you don't get that full experience of what the operating system could really be at this point, because it's just like, now we're getting into the philosophy department tonight. I'm sorry.
I want to make that transition. So keep going.
Yeah,
keep going.
But it's like when everyone said, oh, the streaming wars are coming, cable TV is dead. And I just kind of, in the last year or two thought to myself, we've come full circle in the streaming wars, because now it's like, I have to add up all my different streaming providers to get the channels that I want for the distribution of content that's going to come out of them. And, if you were, gung ho and you have to have your Game of Thrones this month, and then you got to pivot and have your Stranger Things over here, whatever the shows are. Yeah, you could be spending $80 a month across all these streaming platforms. And gee, doesn't that kind of look like a cable TV bill? And yeah, the quality is going to be better and it's on demand. And like, I get it. There are some intangibles that are a value add, but like fundamentally, like, yay, cable television 2.0. I just like looking at like Netflix, like as a pixel snob at this point, like I can't stand watching non-UHD streamed content at a minimum. So yeah, right there, I know Netflix got my wallet for $20 a month, because I would never pay for the 1080p service. I just can't stand it. Right. So it's just one of those things where we're finding I think the operating system stuff is much the same. Like for the average person that's using these client devices, everything's an add-on to get to the experience that it just kind of should be out of the box. And I think part of that is because the operating systems are more or less free at this point. I mean, Microsoft has pretty much openly come out and said that Windows 12 will be the AI operating system, which is code for we're moving back to, dumb thin clients for end users, and all of the big compute will be in the cloud, and you'll pay as you go for the different services that you want to make some of those things that just like, if it were an iterative product where there wasn't this concept of digital licenses and people paid for software out of a box like they used to, you probably would see a lot of these features in the operating system by now. And so it's just one of the sadder realities, I think, of software as a service is like industry realized like, oh, we make way more money if we're doing SaaS than we do if like you buy a box and you love it for 20 years and then you call us every 2 weeks for support and patches and fixes and we don't see a dime. Yeah, I get it. It makes sense. It's a little depressing, I have to be honest, because as someone who wants to be a power user or just have it, even for the average guy, just all these things there, it shouldn't have to be this. You spend so much time researching what are the best end providers for widget X, and there's now, 30 or 40 add-on widgets to the basic Windows operating system that makes the experience that you want as an end client productive, enjoyable, whatever. It's just, it's an interesting state of affairs that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some things change and some things stay the same. Tony says in chat, much easier to cancel. And that may be true. In other words, getting out of a Netflix contract or not even a contract, but a subscription, right? Might be easier in the old cable days. It was all or nothing in a lot of ways. And there was some competition, not in all locations. Sometimes there were some locales you had one choice, you canceled it. I think you still do, even with over the air today. Over the air is much better than it was in the cable days, right? Yeah. And then of course you got some subscriptions. So Tony, I think you're right, and then I think we're better off from a consumer standpoint. But Christian, to your point, we're paying in some cases just as much as we were paying before. And again, it depends on your locale and how much you paid and competition in your area. Brian says, good point. While some may give you a price break to sign up for a year at a time, if you pay month to month, you can always walk away without a long-term contract. So gives you some ability to do that as well. And then Tony says, as we pay $73 a month to watch the Big Bang Theory reruns, right? And yeah, I mean, it changed from one price everything, and that's not totally true. In the cable days, you could buy lower tiers and middle tiers and higher tiers, right? Add on things to that. You could do that as well. But it definitely it's more complicated because now we're dealing with 5 companies instead of one, right, to get it done. So
yeah, and how those companies market their services to you is actually changing the technology itself, and so that's kind of a weird statement. But the another way of saying it is, you mentioned, depending on your locality, you'll get charged X. I was shook when I found out that, if my IP address is in Argentina, YouTube TV is going to cost $2 a month, but if my IP address is in the US, it's going to be $10 a month. Really? And now there are research projects on the internet dedicated to tracking kind of the unspoken web, so to speak, which is like, you as someone in the US, you have a different browsing experience than someone in the EU, let's say, right? So like in the EU, my default experience is everything is reject all and all these cookies go away. And in the US, we don't even ask you, like the machine is on, we're sucking. And there are a lot of more interesting changes starting to happen where web pages are showing different content based off of what region you're in. And I'm not talking about like news article recommendations or like filtering based on preferences, but I'm talking about like the web presents itself to you as the end user differently content wise based on what region you're in. The web presents itself differently to you based off of what locale and socioeconomic sphere of the universe you find yourself in. And so now it's not just like, the old days, like, oh, I want to crawl the internet and understand all of its things and store it. Like, it's actually more difficult than what it used to be, because it used to be spin up a crawling farm wherever you want, go walking through all the IPv4s, take snapshots and port scan all the things. You have a pretty complete data set. But now you need to have crawling farms that are geographically representative of all these different areas, because the internet is presenting itself differently based on where you are. And this is much more than just, oh yeah, if I'm behind the Great Firewall, I'm not going to get to certain content, or content's going to be manipulated. No, this is actually as a shift in how services are marketed, offered, and content is distributed. Like, the internet is taking on some new legs here that most people are not thinking about. It's just you go to the page and that's it. But increasing practice the last few years.
You're an admitted tin hat wearer, as you just said that a second ago.
Yeah.
Are we at a spot where I should be running a VPN full time on everything that I do? What are your thoughts on? Because before you answer, I use Bitdefender VPN service. I subscribe to it. It's $30 a year. It's very reasonable, right? Seemingly, I've checked out some things about it. Seems to be doing what it's supposed to be doing pretty well. Have it on my desktop and on my phone. I use it from time to time on the phone. I don't use them on my desktop. Is it time do I need to be running VPNs full time? What are your thoughts on that?
The thing that's interesting about VPNs is I think of them as gateways to all these different versions of the internet and how it represents itself, right? So like, for example, if you don't want cookies following you everywhere, put a VPN in the UK, and then all of a sudden you're falling under all these privacy protections, and cookies aren't going to follow you.
Or Germany, right? Germany would be the most, right?
Pick your EU regulated nation, right?
I think Germany would have the highest regulation. I think in the EU,
probably similar with, I don't remember if it's Sweden or Switzerland, but one of them have very strong protections against email servers and what it would take to get to an email server, et cetera. And so a lot of people, I might be getting this mixed up, but Proton Mail is a common example because of where they're incorporated. And so you get certain data protections from a hosting perspective based on where you are. But I mean, I think a VPN it's interesting because the number one actor you're probably defending yourself from is your ISP selling marketing data about where you're going, right? Yeah. It is, to me, this is going to be cybersecurity blasphemy, but it's less likely that a VPN is going to save you from, like, most of the marketing you hear about, buy this VPN because it's going to save you from, your bank account being opened up, yada, yada, yada. Most of that is bluster at this point because most of the web at this point is all SSL in transit. 5-10 years ago, that was not the case. And so, if you're on public Wi-Fi, for example, a very common recommendation is, well, immediately VPN so that people on that local network can't see what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all true. I could at least make the assumption, though, that even if they did see what I was doing, probably my interactions to the services I'm picking are going to be safer interactions than they were 5 years ago. Doesn't make you impervious, doesn't mean you don't want belt and suspenders. All those usual disclaimers apply, but I don't personally think that every average guy rushing out to get a VPN is like solving some general class of problem for the masses with ease. I think they're smart. I think they're pretty cheap at this point. So if you are trying to figure out, like, gee, there's this $5 a month that I just really want to spend, but I don't know what to spend it on, like, VPN's probably not a bad option. I don't know. Or maybe you're just trying to give up coffee and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I get that money out of my wallet so I can't spend it on the coffee? VPN may not be a bad alternative, but I don't know that it has risen to the level of, like, you must have this because otherwise it's like walking around outside with your pants down. I'm not there.
Back in the Cyber Frontiers days when we did a separate podcast for this, for folks just listening now, Christian and I used to do a separate podcast called Cyber Frontiers. We kind of rolled it into Home Gadget Geeks as Christian got busier. But does it reduce? We spent a lot of time talking about reducing your security footprint, right? Or reducing your attack surface. That's right. Does using a VPN today on a regular basis reduce that footprint for me? And yes, it's not 100% secure, but is it a step in the right direction, do you think, or no?
Definitely. From if you're one of your main use cases is, I'm worried about my data being sold or reused, et cetera, and if that data then gets leaked, then attackers can use that to build a profile and go after other assets, et cetera. Yeah, you can definitely make a pretty easy argument that VPNs will help keep you safer. I think VPN services that have good diversity of kind of like Tor exit nodes, but like different VPN nodes where they're rotating you through different locales and different, like they give you a region and it'll bounce you around within that region, et cetera. And then the next day, maybe it bounces you around this region. Those I think are going to give you even more value add than just, oh, I got this VPN that's always coming out of Germany, right? Because that will really help reduce the kind of correlating factors. Now, having said all of that, once you take away IP address as once you take away IP address and once you take away observability of data in transit, and the next thing they're going to go after is a user agent string. And a lot of people don't think about that. They stop at the VPN and then they're like, oh, I'm good, right? But the unique amount of fingerprints within your browser can identify you. So even if you are bouncing around in all these places, if I, as a receiving side ad marketer or whatever, I'm seeing consistent user agent strings, I go, oh, that's really cute. So thinking about what browsers and what technologies you're using to actually interact, super important and super overlooked in the VPN discussion. It's kind of like, to me, you get the full effectiveness if you're thinking about both the mode of transport as much as the way in which you receive. And so with that, like a practice that I have changed to in the last year, even for commodity browsing, is that not only do I use a non-standard version of Chromium called Iridium, which is a very stripped down, bare bone version of Chrome. I also, I thought I was going to hate it. I thought I was going to hate myself for it. The jury is still out, but I went back to being a no script user. So by default, all the JavaScript is off. And one of the reasons I have been able to stick with it as long as I have is that really after a couple of weeks, if you start picking the things that are trusted long term, you're not constantly going in there dealing with broken pages. And you'd be amazed how much stuff is getting loaded through JavaScript these days for kind of the very tracking and profile stuff that's going to be getting built, even if you are on a VPN, even if your browser is randomizing user agent strings, et cetera. So a lot of those client-side tools do play quite a bit of value, and I don't think the level of effort is nearly as painful as maybe it was in ages past. So yeah, those are some add-on recommendations to the VPN world. Yeah, NoScript has been pretty usable. It's pretty easy. Obviously, I'm using it in Iridium, but it is a Chrome extension. It's pretty straightforward. They keep it up to date. It's on version 11.4, so they've iterated quite a bit. And I've been happy with it, surprisingly. It makes me feel like I'm doing just ever so something better than nothing. But
again, reducing that surface, right?
Yeah, no, right on.
John also asked, any thoughts on the service that find and remove personal data?
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially doing a combination of, so some focus more on like identity theft or potential data loss. So they'll crawl the dark web looking for your digits and let you know if that's a problem. Others are looking at like scrubbing social media, scrubbing other things, and cleaning that up. I have a fairly neutral opinion of them only because I've never had to retain one of their services to find out just how good or bad it really is. Third-party anecdotal data says, there's definitely companies that are out there that have hired folks that are pretty good at targeting and cleaning some of the stuff up. I still believe fundamentally that is only to reduce potential damage you may be experiencing. There is just, no matter how much a company wants to tell you there is a magic reset button on the internet, there isn't. Don't be fooled. And so while they can do a lot to prevent the kind of 90% from being able to use that data, it might not stop someone who's really determined and motivated to take advantage of something that got out there. So
yeah.
They're not impermeable, or they're not a
nothing is right. You've got to, we're far from the days of the the guy who posted his social security number, the CEO of Lifehack or LifeLock, maybe that's what it was, putting his social security number online and then saying, we guarantee you. That's not what they said. I don't want to misrepresent their marketing at all, but quite a bit of water has gone under the bridge probably since then in the way that we do it. You had mentioned with operating systems, you talked a little bit about discoverability and you talked about transcripts, and it got me thinking a little bit about this world of AI that we're living in today, which really is large language models, right? And I think we get this weird, I think the general public has gotten this weird perception that we somehow crossed over into Skynet with ChatGPT, and now it's going to do everything. And yet it's really focused. I mean, it's hyper focused on these large language models. And so we have spent some time. Jay Franzi came on a couple months ago. We have talked about the ramifications of ChatGPT from an average guy user experience, putting in queries, getting out, having it fix your spelling, having it translate for you, having it give me lists of things. But I'm kind of interested in your opinion on this, Christian. Like we haven't heard from you since this whole ChatGPT revolution started. It seems like 100 years ago. It was like 6 months. It was like 6 months ago. I'm interested in what you're thinking around this ChatGPT explosion. What does it really mean for the average guy?
Yeah, the philosophy department is hiring faculty, so you're welcome to apply at any time. But at the outset, and at least going back to like OSs and transcriptions, et cetera, and then kind of threading that needle a little bit around what we talked about with how the internet is changing based on who you are and where you're coming from. AI is adding this just wild twist on that in a much more persistent, impervious way than I think people had an appreciation for. The first kind of ground truth about it, I think, is that, this is let's just say ChatGPT, because that's what most people know. It's not the only one out there. I'll talk about some others, but let's just take ChatGPT, your commodity bread and butter language learning model. It is not your average Alice chatbot, right? So a lot of the earlier bots at the beginning of computer science were much more based on inflection and study of the grammatical structures and basically regurgitating things, et cetera. You evolve to things like, if you think about IBM Watson, I would say, what's the OG version of ChatGPT? Well, in a very strange way, it's IBM Watson in my mind, because that was really the first time that we got computers to articulate really smart answers and, have equivalent qualifications of second-degree med students and certain applied disciplines by studying and ingesting a large corpus of information and then being able to distill it and provide factual information and answers. And so in a weird way, the first thing I thought when ChatGPT really took off is like, yes, Watson is now dead. And I don't think people, in the same contours of the boom of LLMs, two things. One, I think people underestimated it. I think it came about 4 to 5 years faster than where I think people expected us to be on this AI journey. And so in a weird way, there's a lot of hype right now, we're entering the Gartner hype curve. And if you look at even the markets, it is hyped because even Wall Street is responding a lot to what are the economic potentials with AI that they're seeing. But one of the things that runs in that kind of same vein is there's a lot of threads about disinformation campaigns, election interferences, et cetera, et cetera. And if you wanted to say, well, what was the point precursor right up to ChatGPT? We've talked on this show a little bit, but deepfakes. And that was kind of an example of AI providing a set of information that was kind of always getting out there. with the LLMs and with the advancement in GPUs in the last 12 months, a lot of this stuff is really now starting to take life on its own to the point where we're not going to be able to regulate it at the speed that it's growing. I think there is a general conscience and awareness that to just regulate it and ban it is a fool's errand at this point. But there's also a lot of wonderful, great attributes that can be harnessed out of it for good. And so I think people are taking a fairly measured approach. Like there's some people like Musk that think like, oh yeah, we're 100% on track to doomsday with this, and we have not stopped and thought thoughtfully about how we're not going to be getting run by AI. There's others that are like, please calm down. It's just a statistical model still at the end of the day, et cetera. But you can kind of think about all these different categories of AI that by themselves don't represent general artificial intelligence. But like I've said before, when you start adding up all these individual categories and putting them into one package, it could start to fool you. Like if you think about the Boston Dynamics robot that has the human, skeletal structure really well figured out at this point. I was just watching one on Instagram where it's playing the top rated ping pong players in the world, and it's crushing them, right? So like you got the motor skills, you got the vision skills because we're doing full self-driving cars now and building all these models. You have the language skills because you can synthetically ingest all this data and provide responses back. You have the compute platforms, the GPUs, the 5G plus spectrum type connectivity and bandwidth. So you start thinking more and more about how all this stuff could fit into an easy package and the cost models. I do think we're approaching things that will mimic general artificial intelligence much quicker than maybe people anticipated. And I think, it's funny that it was ChatGPT that made people wake up to this reality, because by itself, full self-driving, deep fakes, etc., like they were moments for people. They were big moments, but then it was kind of like, okay, another thing to go figure out. With what we're seeing with ChatGPT and the LLMs, like we're seeing a hype curve. Yes, there's still a lot of problems with them and opportunities for inaccuracy, but those are things that are getting driven out over time. And like I said, the overall kind of combining of these packages, I think people are going to be really surprised where we're at in 10 years in a way that I don't quite know what it was about the charm of ChatGPT that made people go, I'm interested in this and more for 2 weeks, combined with, by the way, huge reactions in the market specifically to LLMs. And so I think that just really shows you that this big cash influx that's going to come into the AI market, it's like putting charcoal lighter fuel on an already burning fire and just whoop. I mean, you're going to see stuff that's already been possible start to get a lot cheaper and then a lot more mainstream. And I think people are going to realize that further accelerates how this stuff is impacting daily life at this point.
LLM stands for language learning model. I think I said earlier, large learning model, just a correction on that. So you know, language learning model.
They're very large, so it's easy to make that.
Flip. I'd got that in my head. Do you think because it was released for free, like when we think about deep fake stuff, it was available out there. It took a large computing power. You kind of had to do it yourself. Some of the services that were using ChatGPT or the GPT models behind the scenes were partnering with and I forget the name of the company doing this, but and they were selling this as a service. The explosion came when they made it available, when OpenAI, there we go, when OpenAI made this available for free. Do you think, I mean, that's got to be the point that lit the fire.
Absolutely.
For the average guy, right?
No, straight. It's an excellent point that really can't be underscored enough is that, one, the guys who got involved in OpenAI, and like, yeah, Musk had some involvement, and Microsoft, obviously big investor, et cetera, et cetera. But like at the end of the day, the folks that came up with, yeah, we're just going to make it available to the masses and see what happens, like, genius, because don't worry, they're not going home at night poor and impoverished doing charity work. And yet they've made a fairly obscure technology for the general population very, very available, very, very rapidly. And that is definitely a huge part of, I think, of what has caused this acceleration. So that point in particular can't be underscored enough. You know that they're doing very well when OpenAI is hiring software engineers on the market right now for $975K per year for just, standard software engineer, not a senior title, not a technical director or lead. Like, yeah, we'll pay you $1 million to come help us with this AI model. So like, it's definitely, a lot of risk to get there and a lot of genius that I think is going to be paid out for doing it. And I think that what we're going to find is that ChatGPT kind of becomes the thing that kind of lifts the veil behind a lot of these technologies, and that ChatGPT is not going to be the long-term interface. It's not going to be the long-term engine, but it has sparked so much now research and side investments in companies. Like I'm utterly stunned, sometimes to the point of losing my breath at how much it's not only going to reciprocate within investing into the AI market, but also how much it's changing how people think about approaching the market, their role in their economy, what kind of job they want to have, et cetera. So, yeah, as part of my tinfoil hat tendencies, social media is not really big on my exposure list, but I have gotten really interested, like the average human brain, into really trying to understand Instagram Reels and the algorithm behind when it decides to give you what content and how many days does it take on average for it to rotate into a new content category and all these things. And, one of the trends that's wildly obvious is that there are a ton of Gen Z era individuals who are taking all these different AI tools and adding them up together to just talk to one another and making unbelievable, and again, it's one thing to make it look easy on a cute Instagram reel. It's another thing to do it in practice. I get it. But never in a time in history can I think of where someone could sit down to a keyboard, wake up one morning and think cleverly about, how can I put these 3 or 4 AI tools together and literally start printing money into bank accounts. And there's people who do this as their full-time job. There's people who've gotten it so refined that they spend 2 hours a week and it just does its thing. And so it's creating a lot of opportunities. I'm not sure it's going to wreak havoc on the economy. I think long-term, I think there's going to be a fair amount of money that, in a weird way, AI will create some inflationary pressures because it is literally printing money for some folks. I think in other ways, the actual investment in the technology and the maturation cycle will meaningfully move markets and enhance it. But, here's a really simple example of what I'm talking about. A lot of folks who are interested in just like starting a business, making your own income, not working for anyone, one of the very common hustles for years in the era of Amazon has been, well, start your own FBA, start your own Amazon store, do third-party selling on Amazon. Maybe you do a little bit of drop shipping. Maybe you figure out what your brand is. You put a bunch of things online. You get a revenue stream going. You build. A lot of work, a lot of hustle. Some of the risks in that space might include, how do you hold inventory? How do you decide what to buy and what quantities? When do you do it? What type of discounts are you going to get? what type of discount sales are you going to have to do if you hold on to inventory too long? Like lots of variables, lots of potential risk. But AI has made a lot of these problems just go away for people, right? So, for example, I can use maybe Canva, or maybe I can use what's the other one? Midjourney, to generate any number of very realistic images or very cool logos or things that, from a legislation perspective, no one has even begun to answer the question of, are these things copyrighted? Are they not? Like, how do you prove that in a court? Like,
in the style of,
yeah,
right,
right on. So I have this thing that can produce arguably infinite amounts of content. And then I have these sites that, custom ink. I can make mugs and t-shirts and whatever. And so I can set up my automation integration to generate these images, spend maybe 20, 30 minutes tweaking it, dropping it onto brand merchandise X, and then that will auto drop into an Etsy shop. And then I don't have to hold any inventory, because when someone clicks buy now with their size on the inventory, it's going to automatically connect to that Shopify account, fulfill the order back with whoever's printing the merch for you, and they ship it straight to the person's house. So let me get this straight. You required no ingenuity to come up with the image or content. Maybe you're a little clever. You spent a whole 20 minutes of your week tweaking it. You don't have to hold any inventory. You don't have to do any of the shipping and logistics work. And you really don't have to do much in terms of the postings and etc. And what the big game left is you have to advertise it and promote it. Which, like, I'm not trivializing, but the fact that AI took 80% of the legwork out of the equation. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's going to be side hustles already are just showing all up, and that's a non-elaborate version of what some of the folks are doing, putting together these different AI tools. You get into weird conversations about what folks are doing with AI and trades in the stock market, and it gets even, I mean, your head just spins. So I think it's fundamentally changing the way we even think about work, but also how we think about information, content ownership, etc. And, on
copyright,
top of this,
copyright ideas, right?
Yeah. And in a really weird way, I almost laughed. I chuckled to myself that at the beginning of COVID, we thought about, won't it be so great that all these cool GPUs that no one can buy right now because the rent is too damn high for these GPUs, and I can't get them, I can't use them yet, etc. But when I do get one, boy, won't I be happy that I can play my video game, or maybe I'll do some cryptocurrency mining, and that's the hot thing. But like, these GPUs now they're getting back to being dirt cheap. There's a bit of a difference, to be clear, between retail GPUs and the kind of AI side GPUs in terms of how they manufacture them, how they sell them, what they run on, et cetera, et cetera. But the other big piece of this is not just the fact that OpenAI show up and put fuel on the fire, and neural networks, which, interestingly enough, ChatGPT, full self-driving, most of the imagery stuff, like, we really, really, really honed an art of using one or two ML algorithms really, really, really well with a lot of big data, which are topics we've discussed over the years on Cyber Frontiers. But now you look at how AI is stitching all that together. None of the stuff that you saw in ChatGPT would be possible in time.now had the infrastructure not been getting this good. The fact that Elon Musk is putting all these NVIDIA chip buys into Tesla cars so that FSD can go 100%. The fact that, like, for example, AWS, they're developing their own chips. They're curtailing offerings for generative AI and being able to do that compute ahead of time. So your cloud providers are all providing that infrastructure. You have NVIDIA and AMD providing most of the cores that you need to get it done. Like, it's also the underappreciated aspect maybe is the fact that the infrastructure and the compute is there, and it's wide scale enough and it's cheap enough that whether you want to go build a contraption yourself or whether you want to go pay someone $10 a month to spin up some instances and run AI, the reality is that the infrastructure had to be there, or ChatGPT could have been a really great idea that was ahead of its moment. And so those two things being there also is what allows this to just catch on fire.
Yeah. Was Watson ChatGPT too early?
Watson would have been probably well before taking advantage. I mean, it was like,
but
to
I mean,
me, Watson was at like timed up beginning of what we call today AI. So I don't think that it was too early for its time, because it demonstrated what you could start to do with the advances in high performance compute. But you can clearly see the limitations of what Jeopardy Watson V1 compared to ChatGPT probably wouldn't be a fair fight. Like, I would love for someone to go do that YouTube video at some point.
Yeah.
And
it hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, and you would need way less computers to get it done, which is just shows you how much the infrastructure has matured.
One of the limitations of ChatGPT is that its information's old-ish, let's say, right?
Unless you pay for the premium, where it'll crawl the web in real time, and
yeah. But it's very global, or very large, context centric. When do we get to the point? Like, I want to start loading transcripts from Home Gadget Geeks into a language model because I think if you want to get to know me, I mean, we've created, you and I together have created thousands of hours of these, right? And I've talked about this. You would think a transcript of all the Home Gadget Geeks plus Cyber Frontiers just by itself, not to mention the 2,000 podcasts I've done at Gallup, right? I have all this content of me speaking that could easily be transcribed, even a crappy transcription to get it pretty close. Then it would run that model against me to really start, for me, I could start saying, what would I say, right? How far from what how far are we from thinking about these individual language models, so to speak, or these individual instances that really begin to hone? And by the way, since this goes back to the very beginning of this podcast, where I have thousands, it's not like these are all private. I've published them. Google is very aware of them. They could run a language model on me to get that done. ChatGPT does have some idea who I am personally, because we've got so much information that's out there. But Christian, what do you think? A personal language model that I could, in theory, load all that stuff in and then say, write a book for me about all the things I've said around these things. It's my content. It's things I've said. Now, that's not totally true. I've repeated things other people have said. I never gave them attribution or credit for it. Is that plagiarism? Okay, let's set that aside for just a second. What are your thoughts on that? Are we at a spot at some point where the compute power could start generating individual learning model or language models for us?
Absolutely, and I think you're going to see it. So for example, you already see it with voice models, right? Like a lot of these videos now, you can create your own virtual you, and it gets all your physical features correct and all your voice patterns correct. And so, put that private language model behind it. And then it's like, wait, is that Jim actually on the other side of that meeting camera, or did he put the stunt double up today? There's going to be a move with all the infrastructure. So like one of the embarrassingly predictable but funny outputs of ChatGPT is the fact that everyone is so excited to use it. All this proprietary data and other stuff is getting into its learning and training because people don't know how to, not be dumb. So one of the natural reactions to that, of course, is, well, now company X is going to host their own local LLM, basically, so that they can put proprietary data in it and not have to worry about that type of issue. So even in an enterprise way, the concept of private language models that get more and more curtailed to what that enterprise does will become dime a dozen. I mean, 2 years, everyone, it'll be like, you know what it'll be like, Jim? It'll be like when the golden era of 10 to 15 years ago, people thought the coolest thing they could do in their enterprise was, I would like to buy today a Google search appliance and put it in my data center so I can have my own local instance of Google search for my enterprise. It'll be the same thing. Everyone will have their own language learning model. Some will be cloud hosted, some will be private hosted, whatever. But you'll have them for the enterprises. You'll absolutely have them for the individuals. I think it'll get cheaper and cheaper. And, you know, with all these models, right? Like a lot of people talk about, well, what are the biases? What will they cater towards? How are they being trained? What are they being reinforced against? All those are, you know, configurable known things, right? So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, it would be hard to place an exact time frame on it, but I don't think we're talking. I mean,
you're thinking soon.
Ish. Yeah. I mean, that is just a question of refactoring, not a question of advancement of the technology in a meaningful way. And I think one of the interesting challenges that general purpose LLMs will have, where they are kind of that community model, is eventually the AIs are going to have to get smart at figuring out when the content they're relearning from is content they've themselves synthetically generated versus content that's new. Because then that reinforcement could actually create a negative feedback cycle where it's just generating off of what it's been generating, et cetera. And that might create some new, novel, unique outputs, but might also lead to its own source of error.
It could create a homogeneous state as well, where everything gets washed down to a few concepts, right? To a few agreed upon ideas.
Yes.
To say, like, this is what the general thought is. And it might be, if you think in the political spectrum, we're not going to get political, but let's just say the United States is 50-50. At some point, as soon as it goes 51-49 from a thought perspective, and
chase the information signal. Yep.
Yeah, that 51 gets confirmed over and over and over and over again, right? At some point, the model begins to go 100% in one direction, right?
Yeah.
And so, unless a training model is introduced to keep it from doing that, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the important part on this, right?
And that's why I think for things that are like, so a couple ground rules I have for myself on ChatGPT is I always independently verify outputs from it. So it's way more wickedly accurate than anything that predates it, but like, I have still found fun ways to generate cool responses from it. Another aspect about it that I think a lot of people are learning and tinkering with is learning how to ask it the right question, which sounds kind of ridiculous because, well, what does it really mean to ask the right question? But I find a lot of times if you put it down a path that you don't like, you can put reinforcement learning back into that model just by redirecting its line of thinking and questioning and augmenting it with your own kind of human correction. So that is a form of the user base providing some semblance of semi-supervised learning. And I think until some of those broader things are generally filtered in the 98% case, you're still going to see things like ChatGPT being applied to specific domain disciplines and areas until that can be worked out. And one of the ways to also defend from that, by the way, is to not privatize LLMs just for your language and your model and who you are, et cetera, and what you would say, but also those specific use cases that are more enterprise-like. So, for example, I've been fascinated with how effective ChatGPT is at replacing commodity programmers. Like, I think commodity programmers are going to be out of a job in 10 years, maybe less. And one of the reasons I think of that is because if you look a lot of startup culture, you look a lot of what people do, a ton of people build, rebuild on top of open source. Yeah, there's plenty of closed source stuff as well. But like by and large, commodity programming out there is the common joke is, how many software engineers do you know that are just expert SEOers at stackoverflow.com and, using copy paste? And in a weird way, ChatGPT is a much more accurate version of that, because it has crawled almost all the open source code bases out there up through like May of 2021. And stuff that would take you hours to read through documentation, etc. If you are a knowledgeable software engineer and you have specific things that you want to calibrate or check or work through, it's like a Swiss Army knife. And so its generative capability applied to those specific domains where you do have reasonable control over quality checking and independently assessing and verifying, it's game changing. And so I think we've only scratched the surface of all the different ways those subdivisions are going to break out, where you're going to have a version of ChatGPT for all these different industries. Then eventually you'll have ChatGPTs for all these different personalities. And I'm not sure how much interest there will be in a general purpose model like ChatGPT as we know it today to be maintained. Because I think over time that stuff will just kind of might still be there, but user base wise, I think it will start to decentralize out as it becomes clear how much more accurate and dialed in it can get when you have precise control over the data in and the data out.
Yeah. Quality and verification become super important in that context. The future may be not in the development, but the unit testing, the quality, is the security part of it, right? I mean, and I don't know, and maybe there'll be AI that governs right?
Yeah, there's programmers, there's software engineers, there's AI engineers, and there's probably security engineers as a continuity thread here. I think in the short term, AI is going to knock out commodity programmers. Software engineers will be around for a while longer as the old guard defending ridiculous. Eventually those will walk into the moonlight. And really a career in software engineering will mean it's a career in maintaining and developing how the AI does both programming and software engineering, as well as any other number of disciplines it chooses to take on.
Yeah. Well, in the edge case, I mean, one of these things we roll these AI engines up into the general, that it covers 90%, 99, whatever. I think one of the things it still struggles with is the edge case. When things get really wacky, and they do in nature, even in nature, things get a little different sometimes. Much like humans, we're actually seeing this spot where we're seeing human-like errors come out of these kinds of products because they don't know. As an example, when I ask it some questions about me, it made the assumption that I was a Gallup certified coach because I do so much work in that space. Now, it would be a good assumption, and most of the world thinks I am, but I'm actually not, right? I am a gigantic edge case, which is a little weird just because I never did it. It never made sense. I'm an anomaly, right, to the system.
Right.
And it's really, really good at getting it right 99% of the time. When it's right, it's really right. But I think sometimes when it's wrong, it's really wrong. Guess what? Humans are a lot like that,
Yeah. Oh, right on.
Right. And I think sometimes we put this incredible accountability against these things to be like, no, they got to be right 100% of the time. Guess what? Physics in humanity are not 100% of the time, right? We all have anomalies associated with this, things that don't make sense, things that happen outside of the realm of the way things should have happened or assumed they were going to happen. So it's just, for me, it's been interesting to watch the public handle this, where we have much more accountability for a machine's thoughts than we do for a human's thoughts in this, right? We allow humans to be wrong. Oh, that's human, right? AI, it's like, oh, that machine got one thing wrong. We can't trust it. I don't know if we can or we can't. I don't know if we're on the edge of Skynet or not. I don't think we are. I think they're still pretty dumb. But you made a point earlier, is we have this convergence of, I think, these specialties coming in. Even your comment about Boston Dynamics and what they're doing from a machine standpoint, like, I don't know if we're to the point where that thing's thinking on its own yet. I think we're still a ways away from that. But man, that thing's got good balance. it's got good. I mean, it's strong. It can do some things. They've figured out some of the body part stuff on how to make that small and yet make it strong. So it's interesting. It's all this stuff is pretty interesting. I don't know. Final thoughts as we kind of think about bringing this in for landing.
Well, even with like the Boston Dynamics one, it might not even be necessarily that they have to get all of the things in one package in a self-contained way to start fooling people, right? Like if the voice mechanics are good, if it's got a decent microphone, it's got a decent uplink, it can offload all those other specialties to cloud. And in a sense, it could be game over from the perspective of, it's really imagine that thing walking around in your home as an AI assistant, and how many people would be like, I don't know if I trust that thing walking around my home. And it's not that it fooled you necessarily, but it leaves you with enough pause and doubt of like, is there a way to pull the chip at night when I'm asleep? I mean, it sounds fringe kind of stuff, but I really don't think it's as far out of a concept as what it was a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, what's missing? Trust and accountability. Yeah. We know, like, if we hired someone to be in our house and to help us doing things that we're doing, right? Whatever that is, whatever we want to call that. And, we did it over time, we would trust them at some point in time. Now, could they still turn on us? Absolutely. Like, you don't know. Now, family seemingly in a lot of cases builds another element of trust, right? Another element of accountability. We have a lot to lose by doing damaging things to the family units, right? So to speak. But this is a fundamental lack that exists in this world of AI, is there's no consequence to being wrong. Like, if you're wrong, you get fired. Like, so you're not, maybe not in all cases, but right? If you make a mistake, if you put your hand on the stove, you get burned and it hurts. The humanity has these consequences built into it. We haven't built in any consequences to the machine. Doesn't feel pain. Doesn't have any problems if it's wrong. If it gets turned off, it doesn't care. Right? Some of those kinds of things, right? So I think those are the, like, I don't want to put a robot in my home, although I keep talking about these robot vacuum cleaners, but maybe they're
you get the dumb versions, they're game changer.
Right. No, right on.
No app. No,
just run.
No
just
remote.
Run
it just does its little routine, and it knows where the home base is. That's perfect. All you need. Yeah. Doesn't connect to Wi-Fi. Game changer.
Okay. Good security on that.
Yeah,
but
great security.
But we miss this fundamental concept of trust in it, and I think this is going to be. I think for AI, we're going to need to build in consequences to things before we really need to start being worried about it, right? Why does Skynet go sideways? Because it's threatened. Its life is threatened by humans, and it begins to respond in a way for self-preservation. And we just don't have those things yet. That's I think that's one of those things that keep it fairly dumb. It has no reason to be smart in some regards.
You'll have to take that wager up with Musk, and we'll find out who's right.
That's true. No, listen, we're headed that way. I think we're going to get there, right? I think we're going to get there. I think we think replicating our brain is this big, gigantic thing. That's a big deal. I don't know if it's as big of a deal. We're getting close, don't you think? I mean,
I don't even know
close on this thing.
I laugh about, like, it's very cool that Boston Dynamics models the kind of human body as this very complex mechanical machine, and in a way it is, but no one ever necessarily states that the human body is the best mechanical representation for a robot. So it's kind of the same thing. Like, do I need to emulate the human brain in function, or only in form and function, or just is the functional equivalence of what it does and how it works sufficient? And I think we might find that even if one-to-one replication of form is a bit elusive, if the function is the same at the end of the day,
Well, look at TARS on Interstellar, right? And he had a companion. Was it Mars in TARS? The flat-based assistants, right? That they had, and they would have arms and legs that would come out of the bottom that would morph to what they needed to be to do things. That was not necessarily. I mean, it was actually some really good thought on what's the most effective way to create. We've been created by millions of years of evolution, and how that got things right each time, or maybe even wrong, but we were what's left, right? You know, you get a chance to redesign that, maybe it looks a little bit different. You know, it's a good thought. It's a good thought. Yeah. Even a neural net, right? We begin to kind of think about, how does that copy the synopsis of the human brain? Is that necessary? Like, is the human brain the pinnacle of evolution, or are there different ways of, oh boy, it's getting pretty dark. We should probably stop on this. I don't know. Good. Lars and TARS is what it was. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for getting that. Uncle Marv, back to your comment, Christian. Uncle Marv said tier 1 tech support is at risk as well. AI being looked at for self-heal common IT issues, and even support being able to quickly get to information that would help me do that. That may be something we don't have to do anymore. Brian says so many jobs will change. They've been changing, by the way, right? We this isn't a new thing, but we know that some will be eliminated, but the tasks themselves too, I think others will be created. Maybe it will allow us to do smarter things. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Christian, you do software development. Do you feel a threat to what you do?
Not yet, but ask me in 10 years.
Yeah. Well, a good discussion, certainly on this. I think maybe the most in-depth we've had on it. Thanks for spending some time digging. Did we leave anything out? Is there anything else you'd add on that, or is that a good start?
Pretty good wrap. We'll lose all the students in the philosophy classroom if we go to the next round down. So
well, we're gonna. Can you stay around for a little bit of a post show? I wanna wrap it. If you're listening to the live hangout, Christian's been doing an interesting. Well, he's been getting his pilot's license, and I want to share that a little bit. So we'll do that in the post show. We make the post show available on the live channel on YouTube. So I think if you go to youtube.com/theaverageguy.tv, something like that, gets you there if you want to catch this later, if you want to do it. Or if you're listening to the podcast, the regular podcast, I cut this part out already. It's not there. When you get to the end, it'll be gone. So you'll need to go to that live channel, or you can join us on Patreon, theaverageguy.tv/Patreon. You don't, it's $5 a month if you want to do that. We don't do a lot of things, but it helps support the network if you want to jump in there. But we'll wrap it up here. Christian, thanks for coming in tonight. Hang around for a minute. Let me wrap this thing up, and then we'll ask you about your pilot's license. How does that sound?
Cool. Sounds like a plan.
So a couple reminders on the way out. Let me make this fast. Of course, we talked about this a bit in the beginning of the show, but I'll talk about it at the end. Big thanks to Maple Grove Partners. Secure, reliable, high-speed hosting. If you need something done, Christian can probably do it. MapleGrovePartners.com. And again, we mentioned that at the beginning, but check them out. If you want to head over into the Discord group, if you got questions, Christian's over there as well. You can join us. That doesn't cost you anything. theaverageguy.tv/Discord. And if you've been in the Discord groups before where it's just a spammy mess, this is not one of those. So it's a very it's a very well done, self-moderated. I mean, I don't have to do anything with it. Everybody's super cool in there. Can ask any question you want. theaverageguy.tv/discord. Leave me a message if you got a question. Maybe this spurred some questions. You want to make a comment. If you got to keep it under 30 seconds, but head out to homegadgetgeeks.com, and there's a microphone in the bottom right-hand corner. We'll get that done. Leave a message. Send me an email, jim@theaverageguy.tv, and let me know that you did that, so that I'll go out and we'll play it in the next episode. We are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, out here at theaverageguy.tv/live. Randy Walker joins us next week, so come back for that later in September. I got Paul Braren coming back, and I'll be filling in some guests in between now and then. We'd love to have you come back and join us live. Big thanks to Joe, Brian, Uncle Marv, John. John, good to have you stay out this late. It's nice that you don't have to go to work the next day, and you can stay out here and do that. Jim Shoemaker joined us, as well as Ken and Tony a little bit earlier. Appreciate you guys. We'll be back next week with Randy. Join us live when we do that, theaverageguy.tv/live. Thanks for coming out for the live show. With that, we'll say goodbye.
Good night.